Hi, welcome to my session. I'm going to talk to you about virtual field experiences, place-based learning while out of place. But specifically, this research was funded by the Donna Sterling Exemplary Science Teacher Grant through the Virginia Association of Science Teachers. And as a part of that grant, um, my goal was to mount an expedition to the Southwest and focus specifically on ancestral Puebloan sites and over time how that culture has interacted with its environment. My inspiration for that was actually the 13th century drought, or what they sometimes call the Great Drought of the 13th century, which of course takes place during the medieval warm period. But of course, the causes of and the effects of it are still debated today, and especially as it pertains to the cultures of the area at the time. As I conducted this, I went in with with the archaeological background that I had, the training that I had back in college. I also worked for 6 weeks at an archaeological field camp through the Arizona State University back in 1999, and excavating at a later period Pueblo. And through all of that, my understanding of this experience of the experience of the people at the time in the 13th century in the San Juan was largely that these areas were depopulated in the 13th century, and climate change was one possible reason. Invaders may have been another reason that was sometimes postulated or hypothesized. But one thing that came out of my experience going here, and one thing that was different for me this time, was trying to listen to the voices of the culture that have come down through time to us. So visiting places is a part of this experience. Now, besides the archaeological sites, which of course they're the interpretive part of those are much more up to date than they used to be. Than at the time 20 some years ago when I was last there, because the science has come a long way as well. But I watched a number of webinars that were provided by the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center, and they are very good at incorporating modern ethnoarchaeology, ethnography into the work that they're doing in the Southwest. I also spent time at the Anasazi Heritage Center, which, despite the name, the Anasazi is not a term that the Pueblo like. They prefer ancestral Puebloans because the Anasazi term Anasazi actually comes out of Navajo, and it means ancient enemy specifically. But at the Heritage Center in southwestern Colorado, you learn a lot about the folks as well. Edge of the Cedars State Park in Utah has great exhibits. Perhaps most profound was the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque, and then the opportunity to hang out at and to get a different cultural perspective, as much as I did on the Navajo Nation, and visiting trading posts and talking with the people who run those trading posts. I was able to gain a lot of cultural knowledge that I didn't have before, and so one of the things that came out of this for me was the understanding that, while the archaeological record shows a place like you're seeing here in front of you, Pueblo Bonito, depopulated by the um, 13th end of the 13th century after having 800 plus years of occupation, and certainly climate and environmental denudation and so forth played a role. But migration is such a critical piece of ancestral Puebloan and modern Puebloan um, culture and so forth, that when you learn more about the culture, you realize that people moved around, people migrated. It was just part of what they did. And as you go through this presentation, you will experience some of that as well. The video part of this, of what I'm going to present to you today, is just going to be talking about how I create these virtual field experiences and the research underpinnings that provide the guidance for that. In addition to the video, there will be a link to the full VFE from that Donna Sterling trip. I will of course not use it in its full capacity with students unless it's appropriate. I could easily break this into 3 different experiences, and that's likely how I would use it with students. Okay. In this VFE, you're going to experience a little bit of geology, a fair amount of environmental science, and then a lot of culture. And the 3 of them coming together will hopefully provide a picture of the San Juan River Basin watershed. And that really is kind of the goal here. And one of the ways that I'm using this material is to compare a semi-arid watershed to the watershed in the Shenandoah Valley that my students live in. And we're going to do this quantitatively. We're going to use the water balance formula, where precipitation equals runoff plus evapotranspiration plus the change in storage in a watershed, assuming a closed environment and not taking into account human activity. Um, but we're going to look at those variables and quantify those variables, and we're going to spend time doing all of that. But this will provide a foundational piece of that where students can see what they're looking at and experience the place that goes with the data that they're analyzing in my classroom. So, what are some of the problems we've had? We've all experienced problems over the last couple of years in terms of how to provide students with field experiences, especially if we're in the sciences. So we're either not able to take field trips at all, and some of that is bus access. Some of that is just we don't want you going anywhere where there's other people for transmission reasons, for COVID-19 transmission reasons. But even in normal years, it's sometimes difficult. Like the places that I'm taking students in this virtual field experience aren't places that I can take them. To take 40 students to the American Southwest on a 3-week expedition would be prohibitively expensive. It'd be fun. I'd enjoy it. Actually, be great. I spent as much time camping with. See, that's the other thing is that the logistics. It was cheaper for me to do it by myself and go camping than it would be to take a group of students and probably have to do a whole lot more hoteling. And so there's the inability to access certain locations that perhaps are really ideal for your content. And you also want to give students, of course, in place-based learning, you want them to learn as much as they can about the science in the place that they live, and you want to be incorporating, uh, you know, their understandings as much as possible into that that education about the materials that you're living in. So, if you're teaching geology, you might use rock specimens from that area to the extent that you can, or as much as you can. And then students can bring in their understandings of those rocks and so forth as they see them in outcrop around the area. And you can do this two-way exchange of learning in a location. And it's a beautiful thing. And this could be with students who are descendants of early settlers, like I myself am, or it could be with indigenous students. It could be with urban fifth graders in a low income in a socioeconomically challenged environment. Um, the other aspect, of course, are student challenges to access that come in the form of physical challenges. Whether maybe a student can't go on a hike to a far-flung location. Maybe the student can't afford to go on the field trip for whatever reason. There's a lot of different things that VFEs can be can provide solutions to, and that's where this comes in. A number of researchers have pointed out that VFEs appear to be just as effective as actual field experiences at promoting not only learning content, but also promoting a conservation mindset. And both of those are extremely important in the sciences because those are two things we should be promoting all the time in all of our instruction. Um, Beyond that, if you're going to say, okay, so VFEs are effective and they're useful for this, so what's the best way to create them? Well, others have researchers have pointed out that spherical and spherical or 360 content, especially that takes into account virtual reality capabilities, are considered very, very effective, and that VFEs are best when they're immersive in some way. Now, the VFE you're going to look at here that I've created fits both of these. Now, I have not looked at this virtual field experience through a set of VR goggles myself because I don't own a set. I hope to soon, but I have been told by students that these VFEs are a lot of fun in their VR headsets. That's just anecdotal. But they are immersive. They do include hotspots. I have not worked in as much content in terms of like asking questions and you know little stops where but you can do that where you stop and give them little Quizlets. There's ways to work that into here as well. Part of that's the format that I'm using. So if we go to the first slide here, I'm going to go ahead from here on out. I've justified why these are useful. I'm going to go and show you one that I've created. So I'm going to turn the sound off occasionally here so I don't get talked over because these have audio that are built in automatically. The first slide of any one of my virtual field experiences is an orientation slide. And that's what this is. And these can be kind of busy. I'm still perhaps perfecting how these should look. The other part of this that's important to keep in mind is that everything you're looking at here is spherical imagery with a few exceptions. And so I've taken most of this imagery with a GoPro Max. And that camera comes with a nice telescoping selfie stick that works real well to just hold above your head and take pictures. It also takes 360 video, which I can process using the exporter program and then upload to YouTube. And you'll see some of that in this presentation as well. Again, all of that is VR capable. And then there's, on top of that, you'll notice that when you hover over, some things will change their shape, and those are hotspots. So there's places up here where I've indicate that, I've basically got 3 types of hotspots in this particular virtual field experience. Sometimes I add another one, a little drone picture, but I don't have any drone imagery from the Southwest, primarily because most of the places I was going, it wasn't allowed. So anyway, there's closer looks that you can click on, and oops, a little ahead of myself there. Closer looks which you can click on, and those are sometimes gigapan images, which again are another special thing that I've been working on putting in here. Videos of various types, and so forth. The other part of the orientation here is I'm standing at the Anasazi Heritage Center, which is the official name of the headquarters for Canyon of the Ancients National Monument. And I'm pointing out some of the important locations. Most students have heard of Mesa Verde as a national park, but here they can see it's a nice raised plateau. Nearby is Sleeping Ute Mountain, very important to the Ute people of southwestern Colorado. Off in the distance is Canyon of the Ancients, the Blue Mountain in Utah, and if you look off to the north, and I've also put compass directions in here, you can see the San Juan Mountains off to the east. Behind, of course, is the first pueblo that we'll have seen. This is Escalante Pueblo, and it's at the top of the hill there behind the center. Another important environmental piece to point out is McPhee Reservoir. There's a campground here where I stayed, but you can see how low and dry the reservoir is, and that's been very indicative of human-made reservoirs in the Southwest over the last few years, because in essence, we're living in a megadrought. Right now, the conditions in the Southwest are probably very similar to the ones that they existed in the 13th century in the Southwest. We're not experiencing that here in Virginia. We're actually experiencing a bit of a surplus in precipitation. But that's the kind of stuff you'd expect with climate change. Some places are going to get much less and become much drier. Other places are going to get much more and become much wetter. We're only 3 inches above average right now. I can tell you that because I was looking into it with students in the water balance. Okay, so if I want to move to the next location, I'm going to click on the first arrow, and you'll see it takes me to this slide. This looks like I'm promoting myself here. But as with these images, I can move around, I can look up. Sometimes the perspectives are really interesting. Here I am, I'm taking a picture inside a place in Chaco Culture National Monument or National Historic Park that you can't enter. So, this is a location that's essentially off limits. But I can use my GoPro to take this picture. What I'm doing here is I'm using this picture actually as a metaphor. I'm having them look through a window into another location, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. So then I go to the next location, and this is where I start immersing them in culture. While I was out there, one of the most profound experiences I had was a tour at Ute Mountain Tribal Park, where our guide Ricky took us to several cliff dweller pueblos, still ancestral Puebloan locations, where he talked all about the culture and about, especially from the Hopi perspective. The Hopi are a Pueblo people. We got to learn about the Hopi calendar, the Pueblo calendar, the importance of dancing in Pueblo culture, especially as it relates to the environment. We also got to experience a winter solstice marker. If I click on that here, what I've done here is created a gigapan. This is a petroglyph, not a pictograph. Those are painted on. Petroglyphs are etched into the rock, and so this is a gigapan that I created that highlights 2 sections of this particular petroglyph. One looks at creation and emergence, and the other is looking at other aspect, the aspects of the first three, the Pueblo story goes, we're in the fourth Earth, and so this is a depiction of that coming out of the third Earth into the fourth. But this whole panel is used to highlight the winter solstice. So a particular beam of light comes and moves up along the base of this at the right way at the winter solstice, and people need to look here. But as Ricky told us about this petroglyph and interpreted it for us, I have these labeled with these aspects of it, and so students can gain a pretty good understanding of basic ancestral Puebloan culture. There's the Hopi creation story. This takes you to a YouTube video from PBS about the Hopi story. It's illustrated there. There's a couple of videos where Ricky himself is actually talking about the importance of spirals as they spiral petroglyphs, as they are an example of indicative of migration. Hopi Pueblo cosmology, emergence and migration overall, as he talked about it. I can also look at the right above us is the supernova petroglyph, which is a very famous one at Chaco. But if we look up here, we have a gigapan image of it that I took while I was out there. And you can see these gigapans are cool because you can zoom in on these really closely and then measure things and so forth. The purpose of this slide is really to provide a cultural foundation from which students can then explore further. Then there's slides like this that come out of a museum where I'm illustrating how different textiles were made and dyed, and then I'm talking about the importance of corn in Pueblo culture. Then other slides were up from a museum. This is evidence that the insides of these pueblos, the walls were plastered and painted with very vibrant and fantastic artwork. But you can't see any of that today as you're inside a pueblo because it's all been weathered away. So it's really cool that some of this has been preserved in some places so that we can know that the insides of these were much more elaborate than we see today. Then I have a picture of an image of a story out of the Book of Hopi, which talks about the magic water jar. And so this is a way for students to sort of start thinking about migration and the importance of water in migration, especially in a very dry area like this. How did people know when and where to set up their next pueblo, to build the next location, their next house? And then, of course, there was a part of the culture where there was somebody, Masa, one of their deities, would of course encourage people to each group had a carrier of the magic water jar, is how it goes basically. And so that's a really important part of that history. That water jar would be set in a place and water would come out of it. If the water jar were broken, there's a very detailed process on how you go and you fix it. You make a new water jar. Another important thing to talk about is pottery. Pottery is very full of symbolism for the people, and a lot of that has to some extent been lost to us. But we also learn about the importance of actually water harvesting, the building of check dams and reservoirs. We learn about different types of pottery, the different kinds of vessels they use. These vessels were found at Chaco and actually contain residue of cocoa. So we learned that the trade networks were very, very diverse and occurred over great distances with these peoples. So we could keep on clicking through here. If I were to actually show you the tour, what it looks like in its native form, then I would go and I would give me a second here to go to the tour, and I would share it, and the tour actually plays like this. And you can see up here, you can click on this and it'll put it into a VR mode if you have that capability. Now, these first couple slides, these will not be in the presentation that you see because they're not actually a part of the presentation. But all of these, these presentations have some interactive content. Here is where you can, a little game of find the spiral. So, go to these different petroglyphs from around Chaco and find the spiral. There's spirals everywhere. There's more discussion of solstice markers and so forth, taking you inside of Pueblo rooms and talking about what they're seeing in there in terms of the beams that from trees that were brought by human hands and human feet with no beasts of burden, 60 kilometers to build these pueblos in Chaco. The stories here are just phenomenal. But I will expand out to the San Juan Basin, where I can show them an entire watershed image of the entire watershed of the San Juan based on the goosenecks area here. That's the location this was delineated from. And then I can show them, I take them on a tour around the San Juan to show some of the different areas of the San Juan that are a part of that watershed. Eventually, later on in the tour, we focus in on a part of the San Juan, specifically the Chaco River watershed, which then narrows our focus a bit more. This is just a small piece of the larger San Juan, and we explore the questions of Chaco and roads and things of that nature as well, bringing in some more cultural aspects, the importance and prominence of Fajada Butte as a solstice marker. And then, as we get towards the end, we talk about other forms of erosion, the Chacoan sandstorm here as an example. And then I have another gigapan of a view from Penasco Blanco, which is a 9-mile hike up to the top of the Pueblo. And then I always like to have an ending that brings into something modern. And if I click on this, this is going to teleport me to another website that can allow me to have some further reading on protecting the Chacoan landscape. Today's biggest threat is actually from oil and gas development in the region. San Juan produces a lot of fossil fuel. So anyway, I have many of these. Another one that I created is about the 7 bends of the Shenandoah. And of course, this is a way for me to get my students very or acclimated to our local geology. And I really work in the geology a lot here, along with some culture. So, this is a place where I can take them, but it's easier, it's more difficult to take them on a long journey here than it is just to give them a VFE and then have them work through it and perhaps interact with it in some way. So these are very useful. I host mine at Kula. These 360 imagery has to be hosted at sites that can handle it. And Kula, my understanding anyway, is that Kula was designed originally for real estate agents to show houses remotely, which makes sense. I'm using it for a different purpose, and they don't mind. I was able to get an educational discount, so for $120 a year, which for some people may be a lot, but my school supports it. So because it's a priority to be able to give students this access. So, but for $120 a year and the price of a GoPro Max, that's the investment. So under $1,000. And in many cases, by the way, VAST has mini grants that you could purchase this equipment with very easily. There's the for geoscience ed teachers. There's the AIPG mini grant. For other teachers in other science content areas, there's mini grants as well. Just go to vast.org and check out the teacher drop down, and you'll find the mini grant sites. And I'll go ahead and promote that. Right. So if I go to vast.org, I can go down to this teacher tab, and I can go down here to grants, and there's mini grants. Right. And so maybe they won't cover all of it, but they'll cover a lot of it. And often, if you cover most of it, you can make the argument for the rest. You don't have to have a GoPro Max. I like the GoPro Max because I can take it underwater if I want to. It's fully waterproof. It does 360 video at a high resolution, and it's great at 360 photos. So it does everything I need it to do, and more, actually. There's all kinds of other features with it. But anyway, check this out, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, email me. Um, I'm happy to work with you in the development of your own virtual field experiences. Let's get students out there. Let's get them a sense of place where they are locally, and let's give them a sense of place in other important locations, really diving deeply into those locations, geologically, environmentally, culturally. All right, thanks.